Design and composition. Dominance. Unity. Hello, this is Charles Bernard. Composition is one of the most important components in picture making. Without a knowledge of the fundamentals of design and composition, you're not going to be able to get your ideas and feelings across to the people that are going to be looking at your pictures. You won't know what to do to establish a particular feeling in your picture. You won't know how to evoke certain emotions within your viewer. There are certain things that you need to know to be able to do this, and you'll be learning what these things are in the course. Composition and design is also a way through which you can avoid painting boring-looking pictures. Through composition and design, you'll be able to create a coherent arrangement of visually stimulating shapes and values and colors. It is through dominance that unity can be achieved in a composition. Unity is the foremost principle of design, and without it, your compositions will not hold together. Unity is so important that no matter how many software programs you know, no matter how much you know about applying textures to forms, or how many techniques you know on how to paint hair and skin and water and rocks and clouds and so forth, it all doesn't matter if your composition lacks unity. If it lacks unity, there is no art. No matter how beautifully you render the individual forms within your compositions, they will all be competing for attention. There won't be any dominance, and therefore no unity, like in this awful rough sketch that I did here, to show you what a painting looks like when there is no dominance and no unity. All the shapes and colors that you see here are competing for attention because there is no unity. I set up these colors down here so that I can quickly pick up a color that I need when I start sketching within this area here. The colors that I'm going to indicate here are the colors found in that hideous sketch. The blue of the sky, then the mountains, which are reddish, and then the ground. As you can see, each one of these shades is a different color. They are all competing for attention. There is no unity, and that's why they're all competing for attention. You need to know how to change the situation so that there is no competition between the parts that make up a composition. And the way that is done is through dominance. And dominance means that one kind of shape, one kind of line, one kind of value, one kind of direction, one kind of texture, one kind of color will dominate over the others. That means there will be a greater area, a larger size of one of these elements, or dominance can also be achieved through repetition, resulting in an accumulated size. So again, it's about size, but size is arrived at through repetition rather than enlarging a shape, like this triangle, for example. By enlarging it, I have now created dominance through size. The triangle takes up a greater area. It is bigger than the other two shapes, and therefore it dominates over the other two shapes. Now, if I used repetition to create dominance through accumulated size, I would repeat the red triangle, and you see now there is more of the red because I've repeated the red. So an accumulated size is the result. And if I add another red triangle here, now there is an even greater accumulated size of red, but not only of red, but the triangle shape itself. There is more of the triangle shape than there is of the blue square shape and the circle. Besides creating dominance through size, it can also be created through strength of contrast. A strong color contrast, a strong value contrast, a strong contrast of intensity of color can become dominant. For example, if I change the background to an orange for the blue shape, I keep the intensity of the color, but I lower the intensity of the color of the red shape, dulling this color, neutralizing it, and also the green shape by dulling that color, and then by changing the background color, I'm going to make this blue more intense, just a little more intense, to create an even stronger contrast of color. And as you can see, it is this blue that attracts more attention than these do, because the stronger contrast of color occurs here, and therefore it becomes dominant because of this strength of contrast. And these two are no longer attracting as much attention as this color is. While there is strong color contrast here, I can also create strong value contrast that will attract the eye and become dominant over the other more minor value contrasts. You see, something like this. Now a strong light and dark contrast of value exists, which immediately attracts your eye, and therefore it becomes dominant over these other two value contrasts. This is a minor value contrast, and this is a major value contrast. And when you establish a major value contrast, then you've achieved dominance through strength of contrast. In this sketch here that I did, there is no dominance through strength of contrast. Neither is there dominance through repetition or through size. Therefore, there is no dominance, and because there is no dominance, there is no unity here. One of these shapes needs to be made dominant in terms of strength of contrast, so that the others do not compete with that one shape, such as in this example here. Now, just to go over, once again, the ways in which dominance can be achieved: through intensity of color contrast, through value contrast, through repetition, and through size. All three of these can be applied to your composition in order to create dominance and therefore unity. Now I'm going to impose dominance on this color sketch, and that's what you need to do in your compositions. Dominance needs to be imposed upon the elements of design that I listed here. And each one of these elements, shape, line, value, color, direction, texture, and size, needs dominance. First of all, I'm going to impose a color dominance on this sketch through size. And I'm going to add more blue, thereby increasing the amount of blue and creating a dominance of blue through size. There will be more blue in this sketch than any other color, and therefore blue will dominate. I'll enlarge the sketch occasionally so that you can better see what I'm doing. And as you can see, it's already beginning to look better, just by making that small change of enlarging the area of the blue. I also added blue mountains in the background, which adds to the amount of blue, and I made these mountains more violet, and it gives them more distance than the red mountains that were there. And also, violet is more closely related to blue, and therefore the contrast between these two colors isn't so strong that they would take the attention away from other more contrasting and more important areas of the sketch. Here's what it looked like before I made the change to the sky. And you can see what a difference that change made. Here I've indicated some of the colors found in the sketch. And by unifying these, I can more clearly show you how the sketch is unified. Now, as you know, I enlarged the area of the blue. Right now, all these colors and shapes are all competing for attention. They have the same intensity and they have the same size, and each shape is different. So there's a competition for attention between all of these shapes. There is no unity. But what I did in the sketch was to enlarge the area of blue. And that's what I'll do now. By enlarging this blue, I now have created a dominance of blue, as well as a dominance of size. And this blue has a value. And because this blue takes up a larger area than the other two shapes, the value of this blue also dominates. In addition, there is shape dominance. The rectangle is larger than the other two shapes, and therefore dominates over them. However, there is still competition between the colors because all the colors are of equal intensity. And this competition of intensity of color can be seen in my sketch. The yellow competing with this yellow on the spaceship, and then the bright green on the land. What needs to be done is a dominance of intensity of color needs to be established. I'm going to reduce the intensity of the blue. And now, these two are competing for attention. That means that one of these has to be reduced in intensity. And I'll reduce the green in intensity. Now there is a dominance of lower intensity colors, more neutralized colors, and one that has a more intense color. While there is more of the lower intensity color than there is of the intense color dominates through its strength of contrast. Because of the strong intensity of this color, it attracts our eye. So there is actually dominance of this yellow over the lower intensity colors that predominate, because there are more of these lower intensity colors than there is of this brighter color. So there is actually predominance, which means there is more of the lower intensity colors, and then there is dominance, which refers to the strength of contrast of intensity of color that immediately attracts your eye here, rather than to the larger size, lower intensity blue. And also, the eye is not attracted to the lower intensity green as much as it is to a high intensity or bright yellow. Just because there is a larger area within the composition doesn't mean that the eye is going to be attracted to that larger area first. It could be a smaller, very strong contrasting area or shape that the eye is attracted to first, rather than the larger area. For example, if I place a small amount of yellow within this larger area of blue, the eye is attracted here first. This little yellow spot becomes dominant because of its strong contrast. I'm referring to what I talked about earlier, creating dominance through strength of contrast. A painting needs major and minor contrasts, and that establishes what I have indicated up here, a hierarchy. Here there is a hierarchy because these shapes do not attract as much attention as this shape does, because this is where the major contrast is, and this is where the minor contrasts are. Even though this size contrasts sharply with these two sizes, these two do not attract as much attention as strong contrast does. So therefore, These are referred to as minor contrasts, and this is the major contrast. Both major and minor contrasts must be established within a composition. And then you will have established a hierarchy. And every good composition has a hierarchy. I'll come over here now to my sketch and then create this hierarchy where I will reduce the intensity of some colors and then other colors will be more intense, just like in this diagram here. This yellow is competing for attention with the yellow of the spaceship. And also these two shapes are too much alike in size. One needs to dominate over the other in terms of size. So I'm going to change the color of this planet. It doesn't have to be yellow. As long as the intensity of the color doesn't compete with the intensity of the yellow color. The two intensities of color need to be different. If they are the same, they will compete. And unity and dominance cannot be established when that occurs. I'm going to change the color of that planet to a blue, a little brighter than the blue in the sky, so that it stands out more, but not as intense as the color on the spaceship. Never align shapes like this, where they are at the same height. One must either be farther up or farther down. I've changed the color of the planet to a blue and made it less intense so that it no longer competes in intensity or color with the yellow spaceship. The planet is lighter and a little more intense in color than the blue background, which is more of a neutralized blue. Therefore, it stands out against the blue background. But the blue of the planet with the blue in the background form a minor contrast. And here, at where the spaceship is, it forms a major contrast with the blue background, because blue and yellow are strong contrasting hues. So I have both minor contrasts of color and major contrasts of color, setting up a hierarchy. So now, the spaceship attracts more attention than the planet, because this is where more contrast occurs than here. But the green of the land here, the bright green, still competes in intensity of color with the bright yellow spaceship. So this bright green needs to be changed. The more dominance I establish, the more unified the composition becomes. There is such a thing as more and less unity, more and less dominance. As you can see, I also lowered the planet so that it is below the top of the spaceship. Now the two shapes do not line up at the top. And also the mountains in the background, I made them more blue. So this adds to the blue already established by the sky. So there's even more blue now. Here again you can compare the two and see what a tremendous difference there is between these two when dominance is applied. Now, while I have all these other dominances, color dominance, intensity dominance, and so forth, what is lacking is shape dominance, because there are too many different shapes in this sketch, just as there are too many different shapes here. There is shape dominance in terms of size, but when you have several shapes, like in this case, or in this sketch here, then there should be more of one kind of shape than another. And here I have three different shapes. No one kind of shape is seen more than another. By changing this green circle, for example, to a rectangle shape, I've now repeated the blue rectangle shape. And there are more rectangles than there are triangles. Therefore, I've increased the amount of dominance. The repeated rectangle shape results in an accumulated size that is greater than the size that existed before I repeated that rectangle. Therefore, dominance has been increased. And the result is more unity. So what I've indicated here relates to what I told you earlier about dominance being created through repetition, which results in an accumulated size. Repeating this blue color here results in an accumulated size of blue. If I keep adding blue, the accumulated size gets bigger and bigger the more blue I add. So here, by repeating the rectangle shape, more of that rectangle is seen. Just as more of the blue is seen here as I keep adding more and more blue through repetition. Now I have to make changes in this sketch in which one kind of shape is going to dominate. That is, more of one kind of shape will be seen than another, like in this example here, where more of the rectangle shape is seen than the triangle. This rectangular shape needs to be changed to a more triangular shape because if you look in other parts of this sketch, there are triangular shapes everywhere. Here in the rocks, here in the distant mountains, there are these angled shapes that suggest triangles. So this angular or triangular shape needs to be repeated in the shape of the spacecraft, and thereby a dominance of shape will be established. More of the triangle shape will be seen than the circle, just like in the diagram that I showed you earlier, but there I had the rectangles dominating. Here I'm going to have the triangle shape dominate. And it doesn't have to be a perfect triangle. Like here in the distance, this mountain, it suggests a triangle. Just the angle like that suggests a triangular shape. As you can see, I've made some changes. I've kept the yellow color, but the shape had to be changed. This shape here in the little sketch was just not interesting enough. And if you need to know how to create interesting shapes, check out volume 7, where I analyze paintings by the great Sid Mead, and I show you what makes a good shape, what makes an interesting shape. Now, there is a triangular shape to this spaceship, which repeats the triangular shapes found elsewhere in the painting, as I mentioned before. This is just a rough sketch. It may look almost finished, but it's really not. There's still a lot more that I could do to it. But I just want to keep it rough. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I made a few more changes and added this little building here because I felt the need for repeating this yellow color somewhere else in the composition. And I'm making this small building yellow and repeating the yellow of the spaceship. I've created a dramatic contrast in sizes of color as well as form. And because of this dramatic contrast, more interest is added to the composition. I didn't want this yellow to be isolated, so I needed another place where I could repeat that yellow. And that's why I created this little building and the figures. Now, since the triangular shape is repeated throughout the composition, even this little building is triangular. The feet on these legs here, the spaceship, are triangular. The rocks are triangular. As I already pointed out, the triangle shape is found throughout this composition. And because of that, there is unity. Dominance requires that there is more of one kind of shape than others. And therefore, dominance of shape is established in this composition. And because of it, there is a unity of shapes, which is completely lacking in this little rough color sketch. As I've already mentioned, most of the shapes are triangular. The entire spaceship has a triangular shape. And even the negative space in the background here when I continue the edge of this spaceship down like that, that edge continues down here into the edge of the rock, forming a triangular shape like that. So even the negative space forms a triangular shape. Now on this side of the sketch, there isn't a triangular shape like on this side. So I have to do something in order to establish a triangular shape on the left side as well. And the way I can do that is by putting in this little path here that leads to the building in the distance. And by doing that, what I'm creating is a long line that runs along the spaceship like this and along the edge and continues down into this little path and down like that. And thereby, I'm creating a triangular shape, a large triangular shape like that. So now there are triangular shapes everywhere, and they dominate because more of them are seen than other shapes. Now I cleaned up this area a little bit, and also I added this to the top of the spaceship. The reason for that is that this dark line is needed so that a better line continuation is achieved. That dark line continues into the edge of the leg of the spaceship, and then the edge of the leg of the spaceship continues down into the edge of the path, like that, and down to create this triangular shape. Now, if I hadn't indicated this dark line here, that line continuation wouldn't be as strong. It would be too weak. Now, also down here, I could make this path run down a little further, maybe something like that, so it gets a little closer to the edge, thereby strengthening this feeling that there is this triangular shape here. So you see, these changes that I made were for specific compositional reasons. I didn't just put this path in because I felt, oh, it would be nice to have a path in there. No, you don't do things like that. You do things because they contribute to the composition, to making a better composition. I didn't just put this in because I thought, oh, it would be nice to have another little form up there. No, I did it because I needed to strengthen that line continuation to help create that triangular shape. So you don't just do things because you think that would be nice in there. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, line continuation and creating these underlying or subjective shapes, then check out the Art Trek Volume 6 video. I talk a lot about line continuation. One thing I'd like to mention is that in foregrounds like this, keep them simple. If you add too much detail, they will detract from the center of interest. If I added a lot of little detail here, a lot of things like that, then it would take away from focusing on the spaceship. So keep your foregrounds simple, and they won't detract from where you want the attention to really be focused. And that should be on the center of interest, the focal point. By eliminating those little spots now, those little light spots, you can see there's nothing here to detract your eye from the spaceship. So now, since it is the triangular shape that dominates in this picture, I'm going to change this diagram so that these shapes are triangular. And this little diagram will then better represent this color sketch. Same thing with this green shape here, like that. And the yellow shape will be changed to a circle because I have the circle here in the sketch. And the circle in the sketch is blue, so I'm going to make that in blue. And it's a lighter blue. So now this little diagram better represents what is seen in the color sketch. So this diagram has a majority of triangle shapes, just as the sketch has a majority of triangle shapes, and therefore the triangle becomes dominant in this diagram as well as in this sketch. Whenever you have a majority of one of the elements of design, a majority of a particular shape, a majority of a particular color, a majority of a particular direction, the direction could be horizontal or vertical. If you have more verticals than horizontals, then the vertical becomes dominant. And this goes for all of the elements of design: line, shape, texture, value, color, size, and direction. Now I made a few changes to this diagram. As you can see, I added this yellow triangle. So this diagram now better represents the sketch because I have this yellow spaceship. It's actually more yellow-orange. And that represents this yellow triangle here. Now there is an even greater majority of triangle shapes that dominate this diagram. This circle, being an extreme contrast to the triangle shape, is integrated with the triangle shape because the blue in the triangle is repeated in the blue of the circle. Therefore, tying them together, integrating them, uniting them, unifying them, because the two opposing shapes share the same hue, which is blue. Doesn't matter that this is a light blue and this is a darker, more neutralized blue. They're both basically blue. And that's what integrates them, unifies the two opposing shapes. What I'm talking about here is what I talked about earlier in this video, about forming an alliance between colors, about integrating colors, unifying them. An element of design, such as this circle, for example, that contrasts with the dominance within the composition. The dominance is the triangle shape. The dominance is the blue color. If this circle contrasts with all of the dominances, the shape, the color, the value, all of the elements of design that dominate, and if that contrasting element, in this case it's a circle that I'm referring to, isn't integrated with the dominances, then it remains isolated. So you need to find a way of integrating that contrasting shape or color or value, whatever it is. The contrasting design element must form an alliance with a dominant. And that's why I repeated the blue of this dominant triangle within the circle, thereby forming an alliance, thereby integrating the two opposing shapes. If you repeat an element of design within another element of design, then a connection is formed. A unity is established. And that element of design can be a value, a color, a shape, a line, a texture, a direction that's repeated, that repeats the dominance within the composition. Just as this color is repeated to form the alliance, it could be a shape that's repeated, like this yellow triangle. The yellow triangle repeats the triangle of the dominant shape, which is also a triangle. Therefore, the two shapes are tied together. An alliance is formed because both are triangles. The alliance can't be formed by color because this is a yellow and this is a blue, and the two hues are contrasting. They're opposing each other. So there is no similarity that can tie them together in terms of color. But there is a similarity between the shapes, which ties them together. So it's not the color that ties them together, through which an alliance is formed, it's the shape. In other words, the subordinates, subordinate shapes, subordinate colors, and so forth, all the subordinate elements of design need to be tied in to the dominance within the composition, to a dominance. If the dominance is the shape, you can tie in the subordinate shape, the smaller, less important shape, to the dominant shape. By giving the subordinate shape the same shape, or the same color, or the same value, or the same direction. So even though these colors are all different, they're tied in with the dominant shape because they too have a similar triangular shape, just as the dominant shape has. Some alliances are stronger though, because these two are triangular in shape, and therefore they're tied in one with the other, but also they're tied in through color, because these two colors are more closely related than these two colors here. There is yellow within green, so the yellow here is repeated here. So there's a harmony between these two colors. So there's a stronger alliance because of this connection through color as well as through shape. Now the same goes for the green and the blue. These two are more strongly connected than the yellow and the blue is, because there is blue within green. The blue has been repeated within the green. So there's a strong connection in terms of shape as well as color. So some colors contrast more with others, while others are more closely related. There are major and minor contrasts within this diagram, adding to the interest of it, just as there is in this sketch here. So in some cases there are double alliances, stronger connections, and in others there are less strong connections, but still they're connected. Just as in my sketch here, this yellow triangular shape is integrated with the other parts of this composition that are blue or green, because there is this triangular shape elsewhere in the composition. So it's tied in through its shape, but also through value, because this value, the lighter value on the spaceship, is similar in the lighter value in the sky here. So because they have similar value, they're tied together, not just through shape, which is seen here, but also because the value is similar. They can't be tied in with each other or integrated with each other through color, because the blue in the background contrasts with the yellow spaceship, just as they do here in the diagram. But they can be tied together through shape and through value. I'm going to turn this sketch into a grayscale so that you can better see what the values look like. And as you can see, the values on the spaceship, here and here and here, are very similar to the values in the sky, in this part of the sky, and here, in the lower part of the sky. And this is enough to tie this spaceship in to the blue by repeating similar values. And by doing that, the yellow of the spaceship is integrated with the blue of the sky. They are combined, unified through value, even though they are two completely different colors, two strong contrasting hues. Here's the example that I showed you earlier. I said that all these shapes and colors were competing for attention. And this needs to be resolved, and it's resolved through dominance. By imposing dominance upon the elements of design, such as in this example, there is no longer a competition between shapes and colors and values and textures and lines and directions and so forth, between all the elements of design. Dominance resolves the conflict because more of one kind of shape is seen. In this case, it's the triangle, because more of one kind of value is seen. I'll change this to a grayscale so that you can see what the values of the triangles and circle look like. You see, there's more of the dark value than there is of this middle value and of the light. When these two darks are combined, there's a lot more dark than there is light or middle value. So it's the darker value that dominates. Even though there are contrasting shapes, such as the circle and triangle, it's the triangle that dominates in size over the circle, and the circle is integrated through color with the triangle. So therefore, there is no competition between the two contrasting shapes. When there isn't more of one kind of element of design than others, then competition sets in. For example, here, there are a lot of different directions. There should be more of one kind of direction than others. There's a direction like this, there's another direction like this, and a vertical direction here. They're all competing for attention. They're all different directions. There should be more of one kind of direction than others, and that will establish dominance and thereby unity. And there won't be a competition between different directions. When I turn these different directions back to the way they were before, where there is more of the vertical direction, dominance is established, and there is no longer a competition between different directions. Right now, it's the blue color that there is more of. It dominates. But if I made this large triangle smaller in size so that it no longer dominates through size, and I made it a red color, now there is no longer a dominance of one particular color. There are a lot of different colors, all fighting for attention. But as soon as I return the blue to its large size, there is a dominance of blue now. There is more of one color than there is of the green and of the yellow. More of the blue, and therefore there is dominance. There isn't the competition between colors as there was before. The conflict has been resolved through dominance, and so it is with shape. All these shapes are different, and therefore there isn't one kind of shape that dominates over the others. And therefore they're all fighting for attention. But by having more of one kind of shape than others, dominance is established, and the competition between the shapes is resolved. By returning the shapes to the way they were before, you can see that now there is more of one kind of shape than others, and therefore there is a dominance of shape, and there isn't any competition between the shapes like there was before. Dominance has resolved the conflict between different shapes. Now let's say that I change this triangle to a rectangle. Now I have three different kinds of shapes, but there is still a dominance of triangles. Not only because one triangle is dominant in size, but also because there's another triangle here. The majority of shapes is the triangle. And because dominance can be achieved by way of the majority, when there is more of one kind of shape, more of one kind of color, more of one kind of value, you have dominance. Now, as you can see, I've changed this shape from a triangle to an irregular shape. It is no longer a geometric shape. It is a different shape from the other geometric shapes. Now, by changing the shape, it no longer is tied in or integrated with the dominant. That is, the dominant triangle of blue. It has become an isolated, disconnected shape. You need to tie this isolated shape in with the dominant shape and color and value, or at least one of them, at least one of the properties. You can tie it in by giving this shape the same value or the same blue color. Now, even though the shape is different from the triangle, it has been integrated with the triangle by repeating the blue color of the dominant color. The subdominant shapes, the subordinate shapes, must be integrated or an alliance formed with a dominant. That dominant can be a color, a value, or a direction. Whatever the dominant is, the subordinate shape, color, value, direction needs to be integrated with a dominant, and therefore it becomes part of the dominant and doesn't remain isolated. What I'm referring to here is also what I talked about earlier in the video, where I was talking about integrating color, how you can form alliances between colors and integrate those colors. So you might want to go back and re-study that segment of the video if you're not too sure about how to do this. But it's not just about integrating color. It's about integrating all of the elements of design: shape, color, value, direction, texture, line, size. And I've been showing you how to do that, and how to keep opposing or contrasting competing parts of a composition from dominating. And that's why this color sketch looks far better than this color sketch down here. Here, everything is competing. Here, that is not the case because of dominance. Here, there is no dominance. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to design, plans of organization. It is the plan of organization that must dominate over the parts. In this example, as I've already shown you, all the parts compete for attention, and there is no plan of organization that dominates over them. Bringing back this example here, while there is dominance, there is also a plan of organization. Plans of organization involve repetition, and here you can see repetition. Repetition of color, repetition of shape. It is the plan that dominates over the parts, the plan of organization, and that also involves dominance. And you can see repetition throughout this sketch here. There is a plan of organization for this sketch, just as there is a plan of organization for this diagram. A plan of organization is a principle of design, and one of the principles of design is repetition. And within this diagram, there is repetition. Therefore, the principle of design, repetition, is being used to organize these shapes and colors. Thus, a plan of organization exists. Just as there is repetition of the triangle shape within this sketch of mine, it has been organized according to a plan, and that plan involves repetition. But it's not exact repetition, which means the shapes and sizes are not exactly the same. They are all somewhat different, and therefore variation has been introduced. So it's a plan that involves repetition plus variation. Repetition of shapes and variation of those shapes in terms of their size and shape. This plan, however, also involves a culmination in a dominant climax, which is, of course, this spaceship. So it's repetition with variation culminating in a dominant climax. And the same can be seen in this diagram here. There is repetition with variation, variation of size. These triangles are smaller than this triangle, and this triangle is larger than this triangle. So there are a variety of sizes. And there is a culmination in a dominant climax, which is this bright yellow triangle here. It dominates in terms of its strength of contrast through the bright intensity of the color. I could introduce more variation by changing the shape of that green triangle somewhat, making it a little narrower, and thereby introducing variation of shape as well as size. They're still all triangles, but they're somewhat different in their triangular shape. And that's what I did in my color sketch, varying the shapes of the various triangles, as well as their size, and that's what adds a lot of interest. A plan of organization determines how the elements of design must be combined to accomplish a particular effect. For example, this rectangle shape here, when I add other shapes, I'm combining those other shapes with this shape. And there are only three ways in which the shapes can be combined. They can be combined to form repetition. Exact repetition, where the space between them, the intervals of space is the same, the sizes, the values, the shapes, everything is the same. They've all been combined to form repetition. And plans of organization involve repetition, as I've already stated. The second way in which the elements of design can be combined, such as these shapes, is by combining them to form a harmonious relationship between them. If I change the shape of one of them, something like that, now there is a harmonious relationship because change has been introduced into this repetition. I can add more change by changing the value somewhat. Now there is also variation of value or change of value as well as shape, but they're all similar enough so that they relate to each other in a harmonious way. The third way in which elements can be combined is so that they are combined to form a discord, which means that they are totally different from one another, such as the circle and rectangle. There is neither repetition nor harmony involved in discord. There are, of course, different degrees of contrast, but discord means extreme contrast. The elements of design, line, texture, shape, color, size, value, and direction need to be organized according to the principles of design. And when I'm talking about plans of organization, I'm talking about the principles of design. Those elements need to be organized according to those principles. And then you're basing your composition on a plan of organization. If you fail to organize your elements of design according to a plan of organization, then you're going to wind up with a monstrosity like this. And I see a lot of these kind of paintings that are done without a plan of organization. There are different plans of organization because there are different principles of design. There is the principle of gradation. For example, if I draw this shape and then I draw another shape that's similar to the first shape but smaller in size, and then another shape that's even smaller, this is a plan of organization. These shapes have been organized according to the principle of gradation because there is a gradual difference in sizes, large, middle, and small. So there is organization here. It is the plan that dominates the parts, the shapes, the values. It's not the parts that dominate, which would if a plan were not implemented and imposed upon the elements used. Here I have listed the principles of design and the elements of design that are organized according to the principles of design. Starting off with unity, harmony, gradation, contrast, balance, alternation, dominance, repetition. And now for the elements of design, these make up the images. While the images change, the elements of design that make up those images, that construct those images, never change. The images have shape, value, direction, size, texture, and color, although sometimes not color. And each of the elements of design can have unity, harmony, gradation, all of the principles of design. There can be a unity of shapes, a unity of values, a unity of directions, or a harmony of shapes, a harmony of values, or a gradation of shapes, a gradation of values, a gradation of sizes, balance, a balance of shapes, a balance of texture, a balance of color, and so on. Each one of these principles of design can be applied to each one of these elements of design.